Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Victoria, and I am DFP's interim chair, and I'm very excited for you all to join us this evening for our event on how to keep Virginia blue. So with that, the reason we're having this event is we are a little less than a month out from the election in Virginia. And we know that it is super important for our communities to be supported. And one of the best ways to do that is through voting. Voting is what allows us to have all of these different aspects, all of these different rights that we are entitled to. And without voting, we don't always have them. And so with that, we have joining us this evening, Delegate Kathy Tran, who, thanks to our DFP PEC member, Abhishek Mitra, will be able to join us this evening and give us a fantastic presentation on what is happening in Virginia and what you can do to help keep Virginia blue come November. A little bit about Delegate Tran. She's devoted her career to ensuring all workers have the chance to achieve the American dream. She was first elected to the Virginia House of Delegates in 2017 and was the first Vietnamese American elected official at any level of government in the Commonwealth. Since being elected, she's championed and passed bills protecting coverage for pre-existing conditions, expanding voter access, improving workers' rights, protecting our waterways, and making Virginia more welcome and inclusive. I am about to invite Delegate Tran to come and begin her presentation, but before that, I would just ask, if you have any questions this evening, please submit them via the Q&A box and we will make sure to get to them, assuming we have time, come time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. So Delegate Tran, I will hand it off to you.
Thank you so much, Victoria, and Abhishek for connecting us. I am so excited to be here with you all to talk about what's happening in Virginia and why you should care and come help us out, make sure we keep Virginia blue in just a couple of weeks. As Victoria said, I'm Cathy Tran. I represent the 42nd District in the Virginia House of Delegates, located in Fairfax County in the southeast southern portion of Fairfax County here in Northern Virginia. And I came to this country as a boat refugee when I was a toddler and never imagined that I would run for office. But the results of the 2016 elections made me realize I couldn't sit on the sidelines. This was the moment that I needed to stand up and speak out and fight for my kids' future and the future of all kids and families in Virginia. And my husband and I had our 5th baby during this pandemic in July of 2020. And it made us realize that our work is not done, right? Making sure that we have access to healthcare that's affordable and including women's reproductive health care and abortion care, making sure that we leave nobody behind in our economic recovery from this pandemic is really important, whether that's building our childcare infrastructure, fighting really hard to take climate action and making sure that that transition from fossil fuel industries to clean economy is just and no workers and communities are left behind, or making sure that workers just have the right skills in a changing labor force is really going to be paramount. And then also continuing to fight for a welcoming and inclusive Virginia. Our LGBTQ Virginians are still under attack right now. Our AAPI Virginians are under attack, and it's important to me personally on the latter to make sure that we continue to build AAPI political power in Virginia. So that work remains in front of us, and I'm so excited as we head into the home stretch of this campaign. But let me tell you what we've been able to accomplish with the Democratic majority and what is on the line as we all head to the polls and why we need your help. So I'm going to share my screen. Look at this. Okay, so I picked this one. Oh, look, it works. Okay, here we go. Virginia is the most progressive state in the South, and I'm so proud to be able to say that. We have made such incredible strides since we've won a Democratic majority in 2019. Many of you were with us from the beginning of kind of our recent journey in 2017 when we flipped 15 seats and became a small but mighty minority, and then came into the majority for the first time in a generation in 2019. And so many of you are with us on that journey as well. And so I really appreciate it because your hard work has just paid true dividends for changing Virginians' lives. Okay, here we go. There we go. So let's talk about how we have protected and expanded voting rights in Virginia. Right now, across this country, we've seen bill after bill that are aimed at suppressing voters, particularly Black and Brown voters, voters from communities of color, and immigrants. And so we in Virginia have taken the opposite approach, where we have really been able to really protect and expand our access to the ballot box. We went from being ranked, 49th in the country to being ranked 12th in 2020. That's after just 1 year of progress since winning the majority from 2019 to 2020. And that's really incredible. We have passed our own Voting Rights Act, one of the most comprehensive pieces of legislation that has passed through a state legislature to help codify the protections in the federal Voting Rights Act. And we know that even though we have a Democratic Congress, there's still a lot of tussle about how do we modernize the VRA at the federal level. And we also know that it's been under attack in the Supreme Court, which is a much more conservative body now. So it's really important for states to step up and protect this fundamental right. We have implemented no excuse early voting. And in fact, voting has already started in Virginia on September 17th, 45 days before the election. Election day is now a state holiday. We've begun automatic voter registration. We are paying for prepaid absentee ballots. We've eliminated the voter ID requirement. There's local governments are offering voting on Sundays. We've made curbside voting much easier for people with disabilities. So it's really a truly incredible list of how we have stood really firm in order to make sure that all eligible Virginians are able to have their voices heard and counted in the ballot box. We've also increased quality healthcare. In 2017, when we flipped those 15 seats, it really was an election where Medicaid expansion was on the line. And even though we were in the minority, the results of that election were heard clearly across both sides of the aisle. So we were able to expand Medicaid. And this is one of my most favorite pictures since my time in the office. This was the day that Governor Northam signed Medicaid expansion into law. And you can just see the incredible breadth of the coalition of activists and advocates and also legislators that helped work for many years to make sure that we were able to reach this point. And initially, we thought that Medicaid expansion would affect 400,000 Virginians. But to date, more than 550,000 people have gotten health care because of this vote and this policy. And it's just been an incredible lifeline during a pandemic. We've also increased telemedicine. We've improved access to nurse practitioners and midwives and doulas, knowing that Black and Brown women and women of color have disproportionate effects on maternal mortality rates. We have made sure that people with disabilities have access to a designated support person when they go to the hospital to help make sure that they are getting the care that they deserve. And so we're really proud of this. We've started to tackle prescription drug transparency in Virginia. We've capped the cost of insulin for over, I think it's 2 million Virginians. And so we're really proud of this work and are continuing to make sure that we're increasing quality healthcare for everybody. Oops. Okay, here we go. We've also taken significant steps on gun safety measures. I'm really proud of this work. Our Moms Demand chapters are super active and super engaged in advocating and pushing for common sense legislation on gun safety. But we've had one of the few states that have passed a red flag law, which makes sure that people who are identified as being a danger to themselves or others don't have access to guns until they are in a whole different, much more safer situation. We've expanded background checks. We've closed the Charleston loophole that gives law enforcement additional time to conduct background checks. Baby Warren is home. We are also reinstated a bill that allows people to only purchase one handgun a month. And Virginia has been the source of guns for illegal gun activities up and down the Eastern Seaboard. So this is something that I know we were really interested in doing in Virginia, but also communities across the Eastern Seaboard wanted to make sure that their communities were kept safe because of our laws as well. And so there was a lot of interest in that one. We've allowed local governments and local school boards to determine firearm policies for their properties. And so these are just, and then we also most recently passed a bill to make sure that domestic abusers don't have access to guns as well. We've also taken significant steps to reform our criminal justice system. And first and foremost, we have abolished the death penalty. Outside of Texas, Virginia has executed the most people in the nation's history at the state level. And we all know how that has disproportionately affected Black Americans as well as people with disabilities. And so we want to make sure that, we were able to abolish the death penalty this year. We've also, right after the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, we were one of the first states to be able to ban chokeholds, ban no-knock warrants in their honor. And we have reformed our expungement process and strengthened community review boards. So we've also implemented policies that allow mental health experts to respond to situations in partnership with law enforcement when there's the need for them to be there in response. So we're really excited about this work and could not have done it without a Democratic majority. We've also taken really important steps to advance women's rights. And what we've seen just recently with actions in Texas, we know that access to reproductive health care, access to abortion care is absolutely on the line this year, on the ballot this year. So we were the 38th and final state to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, send it back to Congress, and we hope that Congress is going to act and enshrine women's equality in the US Constitution. Not only have we broken down barriers to abortion care, but we've also taken proactive measures to make sure that it can be covered by insurance. And we've also assessed how to make sure that women get equal pay regardless of their, that people can get equal pay regardless of their sex or race. And we've taken steps to shore up our childcare infrastructure. And one of the things that's really come out in this pandemic is the importance of childcare in terms of allowing women to work and make a living for their families, how tied those two issues are together. We've also been able to work to lift up working families. Virginia is on a path to a $15 minimum wage. And if we kind of go through all the different steps that we set out for ourselves, we should be there by, I believe, 2026, if I remember correctly. And that's just been really, really important. When my family first came to the United States in the early 80s, my parents worked in low wage and minimum wage jobs. And in the early 80s, minimum wage was $3.35. That was my dad's first paying job. That has actually $3.35 in the 80s has more purchasing power than $7.25 does today, what the federal minimum wage was. So we're really proud in Virginia. We are in January, we'll have the second kind of minimum wage increase. And so to be a little over $11. Right now we're at over $9. So that's been really important. We've expanded collective bargaining rights for some public sector employees, and we're going to continue to be working to make sure that that all of our public sector employees and hopefully other workers in Virginia will be able to have that right as well. We've passed 5 days of paid sick leave for home health aides and a domestic worker bill of rights. And you know that so many of our domestic workers are women of color and immigrant women, and making sure that they are protected from, harassment, that they have safe working conditions, that they have, access to the minimum wage is really important in lifting up our families and communities. So we're really excited about this work as well. And we are continuing to make history in expanding equality for LGBTQ Virginians. We passed the Virginia Values Act, which is kind of the most comprehensive type of anti-discrimination protections for LGBTQ people in the South, protecting LGBTQ people from discrimination in employment, housing, and public accommodation. So we're really proud of that. For the first time ever, we've established a governor's LGBTQ advisory board. We are one of the few states that have ended the gay panic defense, which allows somebody to commit violence and murder against a LGBTQ individual just because they suddenly discovered that they were transgender or gay. And so that's no longer going to be a line of defense in Virginia. And we've also begun to amend Virginia's state constitution to affirm marriage equality. And even though it is been affirmed by the U.S. Supreme Court in Virginia's constitution right now, we still define marriage as between a man and a woman. So we've got to take that out of our constitution. And we've just I'm just so proud of the work we've done in immigrant justice. We've established an Office of New Americans, one of the few states in the country to have an office dedicated to knitting together the big picture policies and making sure that our state services are centered around the needs of immigrants and new Americans. We have passed driver privilege cards for undocumented immigrants. We're providing in-state tuition and financial aid to undocumented immigrants. We've made it easier for refugees to access in-state tuition. We are protecting witnesses and crime victims from ICE so that people feel safe to come out and let us know when they are in a harmful situation so that they can get their protections and seek justice. And we are also taking steps to make sure that we welcome Afghan refugees. Virginia has been an important gateway for Afghan refugees and special immigrant visa holders and humanitarian parolees and others. And so we expect to have, I believe it's 1,200 Afghan individuals resettled in Virginia. And the governor has formed an immigrant integration committee task force to look at those issues and make sure that we're marshaling state services to support Afghans. And so we're really excited about that work as well. And we are taking significant climate action. I think what we've seen, particularly in the last year and a half, is incredibly extreme weather affecting so many different parts of the United States and across this globe, whether it's, extreme heat, torrential rain, hurricanes, it's been really tough. And we know that we have to act with total urgency in order to reverse these effects that we have caused. And so we are currently on a path to having a carbon neutral electric grid by 2050. Governor McAuliffe wants to have a more aggressive timeline. I believe his is 2030. Or 2030 or 2035. But that's really something that's going to be important in this election. We've increased access to solar and wind energy. We've lowered our emission standards and are building out our infrastructure for electric cars. We have put in historic funding to restore the Chesapeake Bay, such an incredibly important ecosystem. And we have established an Environmental Justice Council to really be able to look across Virginia state government at how our actions are impacting communities that are vulnerable to climate change. So we're really excited about this work and are really just taking incredible leadership in the South. And we are also building AAPI political power. And I mentioned that as something that's really important to me. We currently have five AAPI elected officials in the Virginia State Legislature. It's myself, Delegate Mark Keem, Delegate Kelly Converse Fowler, Delegate Suha Subramaniam, and State Senator Ghazala Hashmi. And in April, we formed the AAPI caucus in the first time in the Virginia General Assembly's history. We're really proud of that. We recently hosted the first ever campaign event that was joint amongst AAPI candidates. So we're really excited. There are 19 elected Democratic AAPI leaders in Virginia from local through state government. And this year we are poised to elect the most ever AAPI state legislators in the General Assembly. Irene Shin will hopefully join us as an elected official from Northern Virginia in the State House. So why Virginia, and how does Virginia relate to the rest of the country? I don't know how to make this a little bit smaller. Okay, there we go. What happens in Virginia really is, I think you can see the ramifications and the ripple effects across the country. So we flipped 15 seats in 2017, which led in 2018 to Democrats taking back the US House and electing the most women representatives ever to Congress. In 2019, when Virginia gained a majority in both the House and the Senate, that gave the momentum in 2020 to helping, win back the White House. And so here we are in 2021, and all eyes are on us. And that is not an understatement at all. If you've read any headlines in the papers recently, you'll see that both the Democrats and Republicans are extremely interested in the outcomes of our elections here in just a couple of weeks in terms of what it's going to say about the congressional midterms. And we know that whichever party wins is really going to take that momentum into next year, the 2022 elections across the country. How can you help us? AAPI voters were really the margin of victory in so many key races in 2020, from the presidential election all the way to the special Senate elections, helping to elect Senator Ossoff and Warnock in Georgia. We are the fastest growing population in the country. In Virginia, we are also the fastest growing population, and we expect AAPI voters to be change makers this year as well. So we really need you to get involved. That means helping us text, bank, phone bank, come out and canvass if you're near Virginia, or help donate to candidates and the House caucus so that we have the resources we need in the last couple of weeks to reach all the voters and help them get motivated and come out and support Democrats. That's it. I think that's my last slide. Okay, now I'll stop sharing. Yay.
Thank you so much for that very insightful presentation, Delegate Tran. And for the folks who've been listening in on all these great facts, my name is Karen Sidhu. I am one of the co-chairs of DFP's Political Engagement Committee, and we are thrilled to be able to spend a little bit more time with Delegate Tran to answer any questions that you all may have. I see that there are some already in the Q&A box, so please feel free to send any additional questions through the Q&A. And I will get started with, we have one that's come in already, which is what matters now to get you to the finish line? So is it contributions, phone banking, some of the items that you just mentioned, but what are you primarily focused on?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I would say all of the above, right? You can't go wrong at this point in the campaign in terms of helping out. So if you're able to phone bank, there are phone banks happening. If you live near Northern Virginia, if you live in Virginia or anywhere near Virginia, come out and canvass. Really the best way to help reach somebody is to knock on their doors and say, hey, this matters enough to me that I'm spending time out here on a weekend, and I hope that you'll come out and vote. But so canvassing, phone banking, text banking, and then always, if you're able to contribute to a candidate that you are really excited about. Right now, every single race that we're running in is working really hard to reach voters and motivate them. And I went through that presentation. I just want to say, in case it wasn't clear, all of that is on the line this year, right? All of that was put into our code, into the law, which is easily, you can repeal if you have a majority and a like-minded governor. So if any of that progress was something that that speaks to you, then you should know it's at risk. And that's the part that gives me a lot of anxiety, right? That in terms of this great work we've done, how we've been a leader and shown this country the direction that we can, the change that we can make when Democrats are in power, how that could be reversed so easily. And so please get involved in a campaign and help out, or and get your friends to get involved too, because we really need you. There's a huge motivation gap right now that we're all feeling between Democrats and Republicans. And quite frankly, history has shown us that when the White House, the party that wins the White House often loses the gubernatorial race in Virginia, and also often loses seats in the congressional midterms that following year. And so we know that there's no give in Congress, right? It's super, super close, both the House and the Senate. And so we want to make sure in Virginia that we don't fall prey to that history, but also that we're giving Democrats that momentum nationally. And so that's why I think there's so much riding on this election, not just this long list of great political accomplishments that policy accomplishments we've been able to make.
Thank you. And we also, I think one of the points that you touched on was building AAPI political power in Virginia. So when we talk about AAPI communities, I mean, that really covers a broad range of people with different linguistic backgrounds and cultural identities, immigration histories, and so many other meaningful aspects to their identities. What is your approach to sort of being true to the diversity within AAPI communities while still finding common ground and building unity so that we can achieve collective power and move forward?
I think that's such like a timely question, right? As we, as a community, look across the country to figure out kind of what next, right? After rallying against the rise in hate and violence directed at our community, and feeling the solidarity in terms of standing together against that. What do we do now? And one of the things I really appreciate about our caucus is that we have members from such diverse backgrounds, members who are, who either came to this country as refugees or as immigrants, or are children of immigrants or a couple of generations removed, and the ability, and then in that, the diversity of the communities that we come from as well. So just really recognizing and honoring that diversity, and that we are not a monolith, and having to, and giving voice to that fact in conversations with other state legislators is really important. But it also means that we have to continually do the work to make sure that when we have community conversations, that we are bringing together as many diverse voices from within our AAPI community as possible. So, excuse me, this spring, after we formed the caucus, we hosted a series of listening sessions to say, what are the community concerns? And we wanted to make sure that we brought in, grassroots leaders, so the grass tops, but also I think the grassroots leaders as well, right? So both leaders that, kind of who are people leading organizations in a very excuse me, like formal way, as well as grassroots leaders who are advocates and thought leaders in their community. Excuse me. And so we wanted to reflect kind of the diversity of the work, but also the diversity within our communities. And so wanting to make sure that we were really trying to be thoughtful in terms of like, hey, is this community represented? Is that community? Who should we be bringing forward? I think that's really important. In our advocacy work, it's also, I think, recognizing that and helping to lift up the broad experiences and priorities within the community, I think is going to be really important from a policy perspective. I'm just going to grab it. I'm going to ask my family to get me a cup of water. One quick moment.
Of course. And actually, while Delegate Tran is doing that, perhaps we could take this time to have a moment of input from the audience. So we touched on earlier a number of ways that folks can get involved directly with supporting the elections, whether it's through text banking, canvassing, et cetera. We would like to ask folks to participate in a quick poll and make a commitment towards one action item that you would be able to take towards supporting Virginia's 2021 elections. So I would like to ask Victoria to please share with us. So you should now see on your screen some action items. And if you could take a moment, pick one that sort of speaks to you that you could commit to for this year and send in your response, we would appreciate that. All right. Thanks, everyone. So one of the topics you just mentioned, Delegate Tran, was the caucus. And we would love to hear more about sort of how that came to be and where you see that going in the future.
Yay. Okay. Yeah, I'm really, it's something that I didn't realize I needed until we formed it. And I was really emotional and just so glad that we did. And these are other state legislators. I mean, Delegate Markheim is we've all kind of been the first, right? And Delegate Markheim was the first Asian American immigrant to be elected to the Virginia state legislature. And he has been an incredible mentor to so many of us. And State Senator Ghazala Hashmi, I think, whom you've had on, is our first South Asian woman to be elected and first Muslim American woman to be elected to Virginia state government. Delegate Suhas Subramaniam is the first South Asian man, and then Delegate Kelly Converse Fowler and I were elected together in 2017. And we've all worked together in different ways on different bills, right? But we've just never worked as a group of five. And we realized with kind of the travesty kind of happening in the United States around Asian hate and violence, that this was the time we really needed to just come together and be organized and unified in our work around lifting up AAPI community voices and priorities. And so we formed our caucus and launched with a series of listening sessions, as I mentioned, and we're working right now on what our policy priorities are going to be for this coming session in 2022, and built off of those community conversations. And so looking at all the kind of issues, areas that folks had raised then, and making sure that we are able as much as possible to address those in this coming session. And it's been really, like, on a personal level, really lovely to not be the only person in the room, right? And when I sit with this group, whether it's been on, we've only been able to see each other once and twice in person, but even on Zoom, right? Just to know that we have some common goals around, addressing data disaggregation, addressing language equity, addressing, making sure that our state government is more responsive to immigrants and LEP individuals who are LEP, and addressing hate crime and violence against the community, right? Those are just some of the topics I think you'll be seeing us look at. But it's just been really lovely to know that we have folks who, for me personally, that I'm working with people who have my back on this issue, right? And you don't have to start in square one to explain why it's important. And so I think you'll see us continuing to stay organized and make sure that people understand that you have to be paying attention. You can't take for granted AAPI communities and our votes and our voices.
I think so many of us can resonate with the not wanting to not be the only one in the room. And so to that end, now that we've seen these sort of increase in AAPI populations in Virginia, we're continuing to build political power and momentum. How can we increase AAPI representation in our government at the local level as well? What advice do you have for folks, or what do you see us doing going forward to get more folks into the room?
So first off, if you are thinking about running for office, the answer is yes. Don't wait for anybody to ask you, because you may never be asked, right? Nobody ever asked me to run for office. I had that crazy idea myself. And so, but, so if you are thinking about it, then, please just sign yourself up. And it is definitely work. It's not, right. It's not like you sit back and suddenly you'll be elected, but that means that you have something to say and something to give, and your voice is needed at the table. But running for office is definitely not for everybody. And I think of so many other ways that we should be building the bench. So whether that's participating in a state board or commission. Virginia has so many, and it's sometimes really hard to fill those citizen slots because people don't know that they're available, and and that it's an option and an opportunity. But sign up for or apply to be on a citizen board or commission to provide input to an area of state government that you have expertise in and that you could bring a lot of value to that conversation. You can always, so that's one way. You could also work in state government, and Virginia has like a fellows program to help kind of new college graduates enter into state government. It's one of our recruitment tools. It's a leadership management development program, and I think it's really great. So if you know of new college grads who would be interested in working in the state government, I hope that you would encourage them to apply, because I think that program can still go a long ways towards diversity. Come work or volunteer for your state legislator, right? And be in that office. And we all have, we want to make sure that we bring in really diverse talent as part of our staff crew. And so I hope that when there are openings, that you're making those recommendations so that people have an opportunity to apply for those jobs as well. So those are just a couple of examples, but I think, just getting involved in local politics, whether it's with an advocacy organization, whether it's volunteering with or writing to your state, your representative from the local all the way to the state and federal level, or other ways to just get involved and see how government functions and what is the best spot for you.
Those are all excellent ideas and very concrete ways to get folks on the path. And I'm wondering, are there specific barriers or challenges that you see in terms of the AAPI population, maybe engaging more in civic engagement activities and sort of reaching that stage of representation that you could speak to?
Yeah, and I think even sometimes in my own community, the Vietnamese American community, for example, like voter participation can really fluctuate. And I think we come from, when we're talking about the diversity within the AAPI community, many of us come from backgrounds where a home country, there's not a lot of trust in that government, and there's not also a history of voter participation, right? Like, oh, the outcomes of that election's already been determined. Why would I participate, right? And so some of that, I think, is carried through to how people look, how new Americans might regard voter participation here. And there's also a lot of disinformation. And so I think it's incumbent upon us that we know every single vote counts. Right? There was an election in Virginia in 2017 where it was tied on election night. It was tied on the recount. And then they said, one of the observers were like, oh, I didn't mean to count that recount ballot that way. And it wasn't tied. It was the Democrats would have won it by one vote. The observer said, actually, I didn't mean to count that one ballot that way. It became tied during the recount. And the winner was picked out of a film canister. And so every vote counts, right? And I think if we know that, and it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we help others in our communities realize the importance of participating. Okay. He just wanted a cup of water. All right. Yeah, but I think that, and I think that's going to be really important. And I also think it's important for candidates and for the Democratic Party to continue investing in voter outreach to AAPI communities. That you can't count us out, and then you also can't take us for granted and what our vote's going to be. And we have to hold elected officials accountable as well, so that people understand that they need to be paying attention to our priorities and our concerns. And sometimes you'll hear conversations where people are like, oh, whatever, that community doesn't vote. And we don't want ever to be thought of that way, because when people say that, that means they're, I don't need to worry about them because they don't vote, right? Like, that's not how any elected official should be considering their constituents. But also we need to make sure people understand that we vote, and we're going to hold people accountable too. So some thoughts on that.
Very helpful, thank you. And you mentioned earlier in your presentation that Virginia is now the most progressive state in the South, and gave so many examples of really powerful changes in a short time frame. Do you see that sort of influencing other Southern states to move themselves in a more progressive direction?
Well, that's so interesting. Definitely other states. The work that I know, for example, the Virginia Voting Rights Act is being shared amongst other states as an example of what they too can achieve. And I think the hard part about it, though, is none of those gains would have happened without a Democratic majority. And so some of our other Southern states, I can think of, North Carolina might be on the cusp, right? But others are a little bit, or Georgia might be as well, but some others are just a little bit further away from that kind of tipping point. But I think what it shows is that it's a helpful signal of what's possible. And I think so many times, I talk to colleagues in Georgia, they're like, we just want to be like Virginia. That would be amazing, right? And I think the work we've been able to do and the progress we've made does give hope to other Democratic activists and advocates and state legislators in the South and across the country about what can be accomplished if they win a majority. And so if we can give fuel to that, to that fight, we would be really glad to be that inspiration.
I love the point about hope. That is very beautiful and very important, especially as you mentioned earlier that there's just been a lot of fatigue and people are getting weary, but it's very important to have that. And one question came in for you, which is, what item are you most proud of having accomplished since becoming an elected official?
Oh, so many. I mean, on a kind of big global picture, I was really proud of my vote for Medicaid expansion. I'll tell you this very quick story. I had a constituent who had to have a certain type of spinal surgery. A couple of weeks later, his wife, and then he was laid off from his job as he was having to have that surgery. They were able to get health insurance through Cobra, the company's Cobra policies, which was really, really expensive. Soon after, his wife was diagnosed with cancer. She had to have a surgery where they removed some or all of 6 organs. And then he learned that he had to have his spinal surgery again, and the Cobra coverage ended. And we were able to, he couldn't get a response from the Medicaid office in terms of whether or not he qualified. And so we just had to step in and say, please assess this application and give my constituent a response. And just a few days later, he learned that he qualified, and he wrote to me, says, I'm going to go and have my surgery that I need to redo. My wife is planning her next set of cancer treatments. And talk about, the gratitude I had in that moment of being able to have voted for him to have this coverage and what it means for him and his family. So I cannot understate that. And at the same time, I'm incredibly proud of the work I've done in Immigrant Justice, of particularly, I think, forming this Office of New Americans, just having an office whose purpose in our state government is to make sure that the needs of immigrants and refugees are centered in our policymaking, in our service delivery, has been really meaningful to me personally, but also right at this moment as we are seeing such growth in our new Americans, a new American Virginian population, right? As well as welcoming Afghans. It's like, how amazing is it that we have an office that is well situated to help the state prepare for and serve our new friends and neighbors. And yes, we need additional money and we need additional staff and all these other things, but that infrastructure is there. And I think the policy work and the visioning that I hope for this office is really going to, put Virginia in a very strong position in serving new Americans. So I'm really excited about that.
Well, speaking of vision for going forward, that kind of brings us to our final question of the evening, which is, what are your aspirations for Virginia for the future, or your biggest priorities that you hope to see the state achieve?
I hope Virginia continues to move forward. And I think we stand at such an important, crossroads right now with this election, right? We can go backwards. And we know that our old policies didn't work for so many Virginians. It may have worked for you and me. I came out, I'm okay. My family's doing pretty well. But for so many others, it's been an incredible struggle. And as we look to rebuild in this post-pandemic world, we really have to do so in a way that is just and equitable. And that, I think, is truly what is on the line in this election. All those accomplishments I laid out for you earlier is about building a more just and equitable future for our kids. And so I mentioned in 2020, we had a baby, that was baby Warren, who wanted the cup of water, but and we named him Warren Bao Chao, Warren after Senator Elizabeth Warren, who is such a fierce warrior for justice. And Bao Chao is Vietnamese for precious treasure. So his name to us means that justice is a precious treasure we must stand up for. And so that's why my family decided it was really important that, I run for re-election so that I could continue that fight. But to me, that is what the crossroads we stand at. And it's not just for Virginia, right? It is the vision we have for all of the United States and all the families that live in America, where our democratic values and the work that we do together as Democrats really center that. And if we're able to give momentum and hope and inspiration leading into the 2022 midterms, we're really glad to be in this position. And we need your help in any way that you all could contribute. Your time, your canvassing shoes, or if you're able to make monetary donations, we need it to cross this finish line strong, because that's what's at stake, and that's what this future and this election is about.
Thank you so much for those insights, Delegate Tran, and for your time here today. Before I turn this back over to Victoria, just wanted to mention one very important thing that Virginians can do, as we've been talking about, is actually get out there and vote. And so as a reminder, as Delegate Tran mentioned earlier, early voting has already begun. Voters, you can vote in person at the local registrar's office until October 30th, or request a mail-in ballot before October 22nd for early voting. The election is on November 2nd. Please, please, please show up, put your vote in. It matters so much for all of the reasons that we have talked about today. And I will turn this over to Victoria now for closing remarks.
Okay, thank you so much, Delegate Tran. That was such a fantastic presentation. I am more of a Maryland girl myself. So hearing all those fantastic things that Virginia has done, obviously it's objectively amazing, but I didn't realize Virginia has come so far. I used to do exit polling myself, and talking to Asian Americans that were turned away at the polls just because of a misspelling on their ID. It was so frustrating to see. So seeing that voter ID laws in particular have shifted is amazing. So thank you so much for being with us this evening. This was so enlightening. And we're just so grateful that you were here. Abhishek definitely did not undersell. You've been fantastic. So again, thank you, Abhishek, for finding Delegate Tran for us. We have just shared in the chat how you can support Delegate Tran's campaign. There are a variety of ways, so check out the chat. Again, or of course, if you are interested in engaging with Basis for Progress, we have a variety of ways you can do that. You can volunteer with us. We're going to drop some links in the chat, and you can always follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And of course, you know, we can't do these events without you. We are a volunteer-led organization. So if you are willing and able to donate, we will always appreciate that. And finally, we did air this on Facebook Live this evening. So you are welcome to share that recording, and it will also be up on YouTube by tomorrow. So please share the wealth. Delegate Tran gave us so much information tonight, so we should definitely spread the word. And of course, make sure to request your ballots and to vote on November 2nd. So with that, thank you all so much, everybody. Have a great evening.